Without further ado, I want to introduce you to the moderator of the panel, and that is Dr. Stephen Ward. Okay, Dr.
Hello, everyone. My role as moderator is first to introduce our two speakers, but I won't read to you what's in the program you have or will read about them and their activism in the program. I will point out one thing in the program. In Ron Scott's bio, it says that he founded the Coalition Against Police Brutality. In fact, he was one of the early people there and helped to build it. And you'll hear about that organization and what it has led to in turn organizing. So what I would like to do, by way of introducing them to you, is to say that each of them is, and has been for some time, a revolutionary. And over the course of this conversation, they'll be speaking to you, and then we'll have some questions and answers. I'd encourage you to listen for them describing what it means to them to be a revolutionary, what it has been, and what it means today to be a revolutionary. So with that, we will begin. Grace will speak first to our theme, then Ron will speak, then after that, we'll have questions. So, Grace Lee Boggs.
Thank you all for coming. And I hope we're going to have a very challenging and difficult evening. Let me start out by saying I'm a very, very old woman. You see? You can't see?
Let's make sure people can hear. Can you hear in the back?
Yeah. Anyway, I'll say it again. I'm a very old woman, and I'm very hard of hearing. So I'm hoping very much that when people talk, they'll either use the mic or they'll speak very loudly. Thank you very much for that. What I'm going to talk about tonight is visionary organizing. And though I haven't discussed this much with Ron, he's going to talk about the practice of visionary organizing. I say that because the last time I was here at this table, as a matter of fact, sitting next to me and making a presentation was Ponsella Hardaway. Ponsella Hardaway is the executive director of Boggs, Metropolitan Organizing Strategy Enabling Strength. She is an advocate, practitioner of protest organizing, Alinsky type organizing. She talked very forcefully about how you mobilize the masses and how you get successes and actually make successes and mobilize, and then you mobilize them some more. And I thought I couldn't disagree more with her. And you know, I'm a very disagreeing person. What I want to talk about, and I think is extraordinarily important at this point, is that ever since the 60s, the rebellions of the 60s, it has been very obvious that we were coming to a period in American history where there were going to have to be very fundamental changes. And that the kind of chaos and instability and uncertainty which was created by urban rebellions would have to be replaced, if that's not the word, by a different kind of organizing so that people would feel that they could become enlist in the struggle for the future. One of the most wonderful spokespersons for visionary organizing is a U of M professor. Perhaps most of you know him, Bunyan Bryant, from the School of Natural Resources. Bunyan decided in the early 90s that with the collapse of the Soviet Union, we would have to begin rehearsing for the future. And I remember a workshop that I attended with him where he challenged all of us to write what we expected to be happening 42 years or 40 years hence. And it was a lesson for me of how, if you do not do visionary organizing, if you only do protest organizing in a period of chaos and instability, you make it possible for totalitarian leaders and demagogues like Hitler to emerge. That's what happened in the 30s in Germany. There are many of the conditions that we face here today: unemployment, loss of the war, inflation, and there was no visionary organizing. And Hitler, aware of the instability, realized there would be a lot of people who would welcome a kind of dictatorship. He was very skillful in that regard and very knowledgeable. And I think that we face much the same situation in the United States today. Except that I think we are very fortunate that we have done a lot of thinking about the 60s and a lot of thinking about the situation in the country today, and that we have started a kind of visionary organizing, particularly here in the city of Detroit. Let me tell you what I mean by visionary organizing. In every country, in every society, there are a lot of different kinds of people. There are the people who are pessimists, fatalists, who are ready to give up and excuse. There are, human beings are not like a school of fish. They're all very different. They don't respond all the same way. And if you put forward a visionary alternative, there will be some people who will begin to embrace that alternative, to practice that alternative, and they sort of select themselves as leaders of the future. Let me say that again and ask everybody to think about it. That in a situation of instability, if you put forward a positive alternative, if you don't respond the way Margaret Thatcher did, for example, there is no alternative. If you put forward a strategy and actions that are positive and visionary, some people will select themselves and become the leaders of the future. That is what we have discovered in the city of Detroit, that as the chaos was going, as the plants were closing, as the jobs were eroding, that if we put forward a positive alternative, or if we recognize the positive alternatives that some people were creating, we would begin to make a new kind of revolution that emerges from the grassroots. That is what is happening in Detroit, and that is an example of visionary organizing, in the sense of being able to recognize the positive alternatives that are emerging, to reinforce them, to verbalize them, and to give people an opportunity to select themselves as leaders by embracing them. Do I have to repeat that? I hope people will think about that and really internalize it, because that is the situation that we're in the United States today. And I think unless we recognize that the chaos is fantastic, that the inability of the powerlessness of people in Washington, in Congress, and in the White House is abysmal. That the situation of the loss of wars in the Middle East and the dangers, the possibilities of another 9/11 because of our drone strikes and the anger that that is creating, that unless we are aware of how dangerous the situation is and how it meets the opportunity both for a kind of grassroots revolution based on alternatives or for counter-revolution, we're not going to recognize the state of the United States today. In fact, one of the things that I've been saying, and I ask everybody to rethink the self-evident truths of the Declaration of Independence. It says, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that we are all endowed with our Creator with the right to life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness, that governments are instituted to secure these rights, and that when any government becomes destructive of these rights, it is the right and duty of the people to alter or abolish such institutions and to begin to create new government based on principles and forms that they think will affect their safety and happiness. I think that's where we are in the United States today. And that is why we need a visionary organizing. That's why we need to be putting forward positive alternatives that people can embrace and begin creating that alternative which helps people who are less active feel they do not have to resort to a totalitarian methodology like this. So that's all I can say now. What I'm talking about.
I always feel very honored to be with Grace. We were talking about this earlier, not because Grace has become a rock star and an icon, but because she has been, like we used to say in the church, on the battlefield for a long time. And because the continuity of that, ups, downs, turns, shifts, purges, non-purges, that through all of that there has been a continuing development in terms of how we think and how we act. And in that process, one of the most difficult things in being a revolutionary, and I've only been doing it half as long as she has. She's been doing it for 70 years or more, and I've only, say, about 40. And I've known Grace most of those 40 years. That there are times, first I'll give you an example, another example for those of you who may have a spiritual base. People used to ask Mother Teresa, say, Mother Teresa, you're here in India, people are impoverished, they're really in bad shape. Said, you can't do anything for them. Do you ever tell them about God? Do you ever doubt the existence of God? Or she said, every day. Which means that when we do what we do, unless we question and challenge ourselves, we don't grow. Just for some of the younger of you, there was a video that was done by a hip-hop artist by the name of Jada Kiss. And he did it, and it was called Why? And it went double platinum in like 2 days. And he said some controversial things in it. Like one, he said, why did Bush blow up the towers? Well, we don't know that happened. But at any rate, so they banned his song. But the positive thing I saw in it for the public consumption was a group of young people walking down the street. There were young white people, black people, gay, straight, old, young. There was some old and young too walking down the street. And the song said, why? This life that I'm living, you got me in the system, tell me why. He was asking the question. The question leads to other questions and ultimately leads to some answers. At this particular point in history, the things that we are presented with challenge us not to ask why. They challenge us to say, things are just bad, so I'm fearful, I'm scared. I'm scared, so I need the state police, I need the National Guard, I need somebody to make me feel safe. And then you say, oh yeah, well it's us and we're against the criminals and the criminals are creating all the problems, so if we lock them away, then we'll be safe. I mean, you can say, I don't do that, but people do. And there are real issues that they're dealing with. The whole question of public safety is real. We got to deal with that. And I say that because of the same thing that Grace said about the period in history when Hitler came to power. And I learned about a statement that he made when they were taking over Europe. And he said he found he had a price as he was buying off the different folks based on fear and separating this group from that group and so on, and talking about the economic crisis. But he said, I was surprised how cheap it was. So the question of trying to find safety in the materialism or in the opportunism or in the individualism of the period is what we're challenged with today. So people come up and they tell us, okay, I'm going to make everything straight if you just let me be a vigilante. I'll go out and get it. I'll take care of it. And the thing is that that is not the way we evolve as a species. It is not the way we engage in transformative behavior. And it is not a framework of visionary organizing. I can say that because I know and remember the period as a younger person where the biggest thing is some people still say protest. We see that right now people are protesting about the city and the city being taken over and so forth, which has limitations. And it's interesting, somebody told me once about protest. He said, what you're doing is you're asking the people who created the situation for you to rectify that situation. The other thing is that protest in many cases does not show how strong you are. In some cases it shows how weak you are because you have to stand outside and ask, can I get in or will you let me in? As opposed to creating something that transforms your soul, your community, your heart, your hope, and creates a basis where you're strengthened and you don't come as a victim but a victor. And so within that context, this is what we're talking about at the Boggs Center. This is what we've been doing. And I can say that, again, because in the life of the Coalition Against Police Brutality, founded in 1996, initially we talked about all the people who were getting killed, and we raised questions, and we ended up getting a federal consent decree here in Detroit and so forth, and some people still got killed. And we changed certain things in the department to stop certain people from getting killed. But we had I guess you call it a split now. We had a difference in the organization because some people said, when we went to the police commission, you can't go there and sit there with those cops because they are the military arm of the state. If you sit there, they will control you. Now, I never felt that I could be controlled by the police because it depends on how I look at them. Do I look at the police as part of the quote-unquote arm of the state when the state is falling apart? Or do I look at them as individuals, as human beings in a system that they went into that they thought they were going to help people, and they get into it and the corruption comes because they say, no, it's not to help people. You have to suppress in order to keep your job. So we started this framework with saying, we're not anti-police, we're anti-police brutality. Over the years, and I can tell you this, I'm not jumping up and down saying, let's go up and, say yay to the police. But at any rate, over the years that we've been there, what has happened, and this happened at one of the most significant points when Ayanna Jones was killed. The police chief, there was an officer killed just before that. And I said, well, maybe the guy that shot this officer felt threatened because there was so much armament that was being proposed until we had never seen individuals actually shoot a police officer like that just over drugs because we'd seen this, but said maybe it's because of the build-up to militarism. So they hyped that. They said, Ron Scott wants people to kill police, and we got to go out. And they even sent out a text message saying, watch out for the coalition because they're going to ambush police and stuff like that. It was real tight. One person called me anonymously. He said, I am a retired police investigator, and I know that the manner in which that house was approached was wrong. He said to throw a firebomb in there was wrong. To do that was wrong. He said, usually we just wait outside if a person is we're looking for, and they come outside sometime, and you arrest them. He said, you were right, Mr. Scott, and I just want to tell you I've been watching what you and your organization have been doing. And what you've been trying to do is say to police officers in the community, you have to have a new standard for humanity. I did not ask that. The practice of what we were doing in raising the questions about what your role is, what your responsibility is, to transform the framework of how you see yourself as a human being, no matter what job you're in terms of service to the community and service to yourself, that was the principal question. Now, so what have we done? We moved from just the protest about the deaths of the police by the hands of police to a situation, and by the way, we ended up actually having police officers who were victims of violence within the police department who came to us because they couldn't come to the others in the department. And we developed peace zones for life because we saw that people were beginning to act out the reaction to the problems that people have in terms of economics. And we found out that the majority of people who were having these issues with substance abuse and domestic violence, and then they started killing each other, beating each other. So how could we talk about what the police are doing if we don't talk about what your next door neighbor is doing, or what you're doing in your own house? We actually had a funeral of somebody who was killed by the police, and we had to separate the two people in the funeral because they were going to kill each other. So what we did is we said, it is not enough to react to rebel. And I thought back in terms of some of the things we did in the Black Panther Party. And it wasn't just about guns. That was a very short period. We got into survival programs where we started doing food and other things. And then we came up with a concept called I and we. That it is our duty and our responsibility not to react with rancor, anger, and hostility, but to feel that which the other person feels. It's not to be seen only in the context of we know we're African American or Native American or whatever, but to see ourselves as new beings on the planet. And that our role as new beings on the planet is to transform the relationships that we have. Is to find ways to resolve conflict before it starts so that you don't call the police to try to resolve the conflict. When I've spoken, and I'm about to finish, I've said that in doing Peace Zones for Life, we wanted to restore the big mama concept. How many of you remember the person on the block that if you had a conflict, they not only knew you had the conflict, but they were watching the conflict and they knew everything that was going on the block. And in my neighborhood, there was a woman called Mrs. Holt. She watched everything and knew everybody and knew what time they came in and knew what they did. And if they did it wrong, she would intervene. How many people ever remember people like that in your neighborhood? Raise your hand if you do. Okay, so half of you did and half of you do. We were talking about like what my friend Yusuf Shakur talks about, restoring the neighbor to the hood. We are addressing how we engage conflict resolution, mediation, and restorative justice. All of those are big words for saying that what we have to do is find a way so that when people have conflict, that they have a means of resolving it in a civil fashion so that it doesn't become a question of whether or not I shoot you for a chicken bone. That it becomes a situation so that we can talk about how we can get more chickens out of the garden that we have next door. We had a guy, and you remember this over on the east side. We had just done a Peace Zones opening. And then after we did the opening, it was really great. We heard two guys say, I'm gonna pop you. Another guy said, I'm gonna pop you. We went next door, and before we thought about anything, we intervened, we talked to the folks. We said, no, we're not gonna have anybody popping anybody today. Found out that the older guy was mad at the younger guy because the younger guy's friend had stolen the bike. And then finally when we got to the point, he said, well, don't worry about the bike, we'll get you a bike. He said, no, I'm still gonna pop him. never about the body. It was about the humanity of this man that had been taken from him, or he saw himself having been taken from him, and the other young man who felt that he had to stand up to the other guy because his humanity or his manhood would be threatened. Before long, as we intervened, the other guys who were standing around the liquor store, somebody called the police. Police showed up 40 minutes later. And one of the cops ran back in the back, took out his gun and ran back in the back. And the other guy, I could tell, he wasn't really about that. It was the end of the shift. He wanted to go home. And he was standing there and said, hey man, you don't have to do all of that. He said, they got this under control. And I said, yes, we have, officer. And then finally, the people in the neighborhood, they stepped up and said, well, let me tell you what we did. He was doing this and he was doing that, and we broke it up and we did this and so forth. And these people were here for peace, and we want peace in our neighborhood. Thank you, officer. You can go home. It's at the end of your shift. You can go home because we got this. If, as Grace said, you give the vision, if you give the alternative to what exists, if you talk about it in terms of restoring and developing humanity at a greater stage than what we have allowed ourselves to be diminished to, you will see the transformation of the human spirit. It used to be revolutionaries didn't talk about spirit, they didn't talk about soul, they didn't talk about all of that. But we know now there is something within human beings, like what Mother Teresa said, that transcends the conditions that we find ourselves in. Why were people in Alabama willing to go further than they could when they knew they might die? Because the transformation of the human spirit, not just to get more things, not just to have a better job, but the transformation of humanity was greater. And that's the period we're in now. Some people fell on the way, and they thought it was about getting more stuff, becoming the president of this university, or that person, or this, that. And as we see the erosion of the framework of capitalism in the world at this point, we have to ask ourselves what it means to be a human being, how we build structures, whether it be peace zones, whether it be farms, whether it be relationships among people in our community, whether it be looking beyond the race, class, and gender, and seeing where we are as real human beings that are somewhere underneath all of that. That is the stage that we're at. And that's when we talk about visionary organizing. We have to see the people that we want to be. And we have to institute the framework and introduce the struggles that are necessary to do that. And I guarantee you, when you begin looking like that, it's like a weight that comes off your shoulder. Then you don't worry about how the system has got you now. Because these guys that we're talking about, they don't know how to run the system. That's why we're in a situation, and that Grace always says, everybody said, I don't believe anybody can run the country better than I can. And if you believe that tonight, that's where you should be. Is that nobody can do what needs to be done on the face of the planet to transform the planet better than the people sitting in this room, because you know better than the president, better than 90% of the Congress, and all these folks, what needs to be done is our challenge and our choice to build the structures to do.
Thank you, Grace and Ron. Now, it is time to have questions or contributions from others. So what I'll do is, if you raise your hand, I'll bring the mic to you.
My question is one of, I guess, an exercise of compassion and also inclusiveness. When you speak about, let's say, visionary organizing, in some ways there is still a response to a part of reality that you find unpreferable. I'm sorry, my words are not coming out as well as I'd like, but something that you obviously currently don't appreciate. And on one, I guess it's a personal question too. On one hand, I'd consider inviting, or I guess just including the people that are maybe inciting harm to a community or to whatever it is. But on the other hand, as far as gauging the maturity or the presence of the community framework for dispute resolution or things like that, how do you strike that balance? If the community itself hasn't been fully realized or significantly realized enough to the point that you can constructively and feasibly manage any potential conflict. So,
You want to answer?
Let me just give a caveat. In addition to being hard of hearing, I have hearing aids. And by the time the hearing aids and the mic come together, I don't get what you're saying. So I will have to have it translated for me.
What I believe he was asking was where you have a community and you're talking about visionary organizing. The question is whether or not that community has the ability at that particular time to engage in dispute resolution or other things, whether they're at that level, whether they can do that, and if they're not, how do you deal with that issue?
Well, it takes time. And I think what we have here in Detroit, and that's why it's so important that we're here in Detroit, is that a city which was once the national and international symbol of the miracles of industrialization, and then became the national and the international symbol of the devastation of deindustrialization, is national and the international symbol of a post-industrial society. We have the evidence here. It's not perfect. We have a lot of work to do. But the country is being brought back into the city. That we are reversing that process of the expropriation of people from the land, which was the commons, the enclosure of the commons, which forced people to work in the factory. We are beginning to grow our own food. We are beginning to create our own safety zones, our own peace zones. We are working on creating new forms of government. That's going to take time. I think we are now at the stage of the Constituent Assembly. That's what I think we're doing. We're beginning to determine the forms by which we govern ourselves. Because we need that, we know we're going in that stage. That's the evidence.
I just want to answer too, is that I don't know, I wrote down here is how do you see yourself and how do you assess the relationships that you build? I don't know if I can say, I don't know, I'm not a sociologist and cultural anthropologist, I don't know. I can't make an assessment that well in terms of whether or not people are ready to do what they're doing. What I know is that in every situation we've been in some real tight situations. I'll just give you one example. A guy was shot and by the police, and people were very upset. We went into the neighborhood, we talked to folks about it. We didn't do this. The people decided they wanted to do something about it. So what did they do? They went to a previously abandoned school that had weeds about 10 feet high. And they said, we're going to cut the weeds down and we're going to have a peace park because we are tired of the violence in the neighborhood. They didn't have the lawnmowers that were big enough, so one guy came out finally with his own lawnmower. Before he was through, about 10 other lawnmowers were out, and this place that had been abandoned for like 10 years was cleared, and they had a picnic. Some of the people who came out were the guys who were sitting on the corner who were little weed dealers. We went over and talked to them, asked them if they would come out. I knew what they were doing. I didn't make any assessment about what they were doing. I mean, part of a post-industrial society. They were doing underground economy. So, you know, and now it may be above ground economy soon. but I didn't make any assessment about what they were doing. I just said, okay, and a part of that is cultural relationship too. And I talked to them. I said, would you young men come out and help us clear this field? You live in this neighborhood. The people want to do that. Would you help us do it? They came out. Nobody had ever asked them to do that. They had never been asked for that. People saw them on the corner selling weed, and they said, let's call the police, let's lock them up. They came out, they worked. At the end of the day, when it was done, when the picnic was supposed to take place, they went home and they got dressed. Well, no baggy pants, nothing. They came back, and they walked down the street, and these guys, the drug enforcement folks, stopped them. We had some lawyers there, we intervened, and we challenged them. I won't go through all the details. But in the process of challenging them, they had to let them go. They stood like this, and they walked to the park. And we had a picnic, and the people came out and they said, we're going to make this Peace Park. And the young man, I said, look, would you please, since some of the older people get kind of upset when you deal with these drugs on the corner, they get afraid of you, they know you. Could you move it somewhere else and do that? They said, yeah, we're going to move it. They said, but can we find some way that we can sell something else at the park on Sunday? Because we saw their humanity. We did not see what they're characterized as. And we have to see the humanity beyond the stereotypes, the anger. And I'm telling you, in all the years I've done this, I've never seen whether a person was carrying a gun, or angry or whatever, that you could not find, with the exception maybe if they were on K1, K2, whatever, where you couldn't reach the soul of a person. Because they're waiting for, and I hate to sound, you know, really, I'm saying, just like old Che saying, sentimental, that people are looking for love in the wrong places. They don't have anybody to talk about it. And when you ask and you say, you can take your community and you can transform it, that's bigger than sitting on the corner selling drugs all day. And I think we make a mistake when we say whether or not people are ready for these things. They're ready for it. It's a question of, are we ready to put the thing out there?
I'm very, very happy that we have the symposium today to just talk amongst ourselves about ways to resolve the issues we're facing in the community. With the theme of this symposium as a backdrop, the urgency of now, I'd like to ask Grace, and also Ron, you said that you believe this is happening, that this visionary organizing is happening in Detroit. Who's doing it and where? Because I want to be hopeful, but I mean, Ron's one person, but where is it happening? And if it's happening in little pockets where we're not aware that it's happening, how do you develop the hopefulness that encourages you to go out and do things? Because it seems like it's not happening to the degree that we certainly need it to happen for Detroit to turn around.
Let me give you an example of visionary organizing. I think will answer your question. Okay, I've got that mic.
I know, but it's not working as well as it should.
In 1988, we had a black mayor in Detroit, Coleman Young. He was elected after the urban rebellions because the white power structure, among other things, not only was not sort of black mayor, but because the white power structure had discovered through the urban rebellions that a white mayor could no longer maintain law and order. Whereupon this black mayor comes to power and he's able to integrate the fire department, the police department, but he isn't able to do anything about jobs. He tries desperately to do things. He bulldozes the whole community in Amtrak in order to create the GM plant, the hometown plant. Nothing works. So he says we need a casino industry to create 50,000 jobs. And we said, and this is a wonderful example of visionary organizing, we said there is an alternative to rebuilding Detroit. Instead of seeing young people as the problem, let's start seeing them as the solution. So we invited young people to join a program called Detroit Summer. To be there's a daughter was a member of the first Detroit Summer. They organized Detroit Summer to give young people to participate in rebuilding, redefining, and re-spiriting Detroit from the ground up. And when the young people did this, the older people who had been raised down south said, oh, we want to work with young people. So they had learned how to use the vacant lots for food, for community gardening, and they wanted to teach young people a different way of thinking, that they didn't think in terms of quick fix only. So they came and began helping young people. And that helped to spur the urban agricultural movement. And today, where there are only a few dozen, maybe, gardens, back in those days, there are now thousands of community gardens in the city of Detroit. And we're producing our own food. And the whole idea of growing your own food and creating your own freedom by growing your own food, because you don't have to go to the bank, you don't have a job in order to have something to eat. We have a group called the Freedom Program. And that's what, there's D-Town, down here, all sorts of towns. And when you can feed yourself, you begin feeding yourself. And when people see that, they begin to do other things. They begin to create peace zones. Instead of protesting against police brutality, which Ron's group used to do, they began creating peace zones where the people sort of help one another. And that, one thing leads to another. Not overnight.
Yeah.
For years.
And I have to say that, you know, if you're looking for some things, if you go to the Boggs Center website, you will find a number of places that are being done. What Grace did not say is that there are now over 200,000 bushels of food that are growing. The fastest growing farm industry in the United States and in Michigan is farms of 8 acres and less. And so that's happening right here as we speak. And farming is not just farming in terms of feeding, it's the transformation of relationships that come in that process. So in the capacity that we're doing with peace zones, obviously we need to advance that more. We're building capacity. We're building economic capacity, because part of the peace zones process is not just the resolution of conflict, but it's also the creation of economic sustainability. And so within that context, we can, you know, talk about that after the meeting and talk about some of the hope. And when was that, Grace, when we did City of Hope? City of Hope, how long ago was that? What's that? Yeah, 2007, we created Detroit City of Hope. And instead of looking back at the disaster, we projected what was the framework of hope. And so some of the things that you see now, these different projects, came out of that. So it's not touted in the media a lot, or the corporate media. You know, we do it on our radio show, on television programs, and so on, and some of the other things. So if you go to the website, that's the easiest thing I can tell you. There are a number of documentaries that are being shot about this. There was a wonderful film called We Are Not Ghosts that speaks to this. And so we would be very happy to do that. And I invite you to the Boggs Center for some of the discussions and conversations that we're having. And because when you ask that, you are the leaders that we've been looking for. So we are enhanced by virtue of your involvement to build the capacity that we need to build.
As we move to next hand, I'm going to take moderator's prerogative to make a quick point. So Ron mentioned that the gardens, among other things, also provide a space where people have interaction. Part of it is intergenerational interaction and dialogues. Similar to Detroit Summer, one of the elements of Detroit Summer was holding intergenerational dialogues with the young people of various ages to speak to their elders and so forth. And it occurs to me that in some sense we are having an intergenerational dialogue here today. And to illustrate that, I'll point out, as many of you know, that Grace is 97 years old. So I'm going to assume she's the oldest person in the room. Is anyone older than 97 in 1 month? So Grace is the oldest. We have a few young people in the room, one of them who happens to be wearing a Detroit Summer t-shirt. So may I ask what the ages of the younger people? Now, when I say young people, you might have some sense, I mean young youth. When Grace says young people, we all pretty much fit through that. But so may I have anyone to shout out the ages of the young people in the room so we can get a sense of the... I know we have a couple of college students, 20-somethings, but we even have younger than that. A 5-year-old? And the young man here, how old are you, sir? 12 years old? And the Detroit Summer t-shirt wearing? The older, right?
Yeah, 13.
13. So the range of the age now, 18. We have 18s and 19, 20. Okay, so I think that's the end of that moderator's prerogative. There may be one more coming.
Thanks. My name is Tom Stevens. I've been a revolutionary even shorter than Ron. I want to thank Ron and Grace for their incredibly both concise and brilliant contributions, but I also want to pick up on our sister's question here, because I thought that was such a tremendous question about, what we don't see, the transformative organizing that's going on because it's in pockets, it's covered up and lied about by the mass media. There's a whole educational and thought control and conditioning process that's going on that teaches us to ignore it or dismiss it as irrelevant. And I think that's absolutely key here is that we all need to realize that just because these powers are lying about it, covering it up, doesn't mean it's not happening. It doesn't mean it's not important in the ways that Ron and Grace have outlined. But then the other part of your question is even more, it seems to me, critical to this whole thing, because you asked, well, where do you find hope? And I think, when I look at just what's happened in this summer with the climate and the fires and the derecho and all the other stuff, I say that when we ask, and Ron was talking about seeds of hope, when we ask for hope, we're asking a lot. I mean, we may very well be asking each other for more than we can deliver if we're asking for hope. It's okay to still ask, but you might want to realize how much we're asking. I mean, I think it's in the courage and the creativity and the inspiration of somebody like Ron who says, I've been a revolutionary for 40 years. And realize that we are, I was surprised to hear both Ron and Grace talk about Hitler and the 30s. But we really are living through times of that sweeping historical magnitude. And as Grace has said, even more so, it's an era that's akin to the shift from hunter-gatherer society to the origins of civilization and agrarian, cultivation. It's as she said, we're dealing with a time when it's really obvious that there are going to be huge changes. In fact, they're happening. It's not that they are going to be; they are happening. We're living in the middle of it, and just having the courage and the presence of mind and the creativity and the determination to stick with it is, I don't know if that's hope or not, but I can give you that. I don't know if I can give you hope beyond that. And I think it's important to realize that in terms of this dialogue. Finally, there's one thing I would challenge Grace and Ron on a little bit that I heard repeatedly, transformative action instead of protest organizing. Transformative organizing instead, and visionary organizing instead of protest organizing. And I always wonder why it has to be instead of. I mean, I think the transformative aspect, as articulated here, is great. I'm here and I'm with you. But I also think that, our current leaders, let's leave Hitler out of the room for now because we got our hands full with, Snyder and foundations and Obama and CIA and their drone program in the Middle East. We've got things that are being done with our water, with our food, with our land, with our humanity, that we should resist, and we should help people resist in addition to being transformative. And that's the only thing I would add to what you guys are saying.
I think Tom mentioned the word that I was waiting for, and that's resistance. Not protest. Resistance means that you come up with a programmatic response, that you don't ask for the reaction from those that you're protesting, but you come up with the plan, the programmatic response to that. That is the thing. We have a duty. Grace, I think, cited it in the Declaration of Independence. We have a duty to resist. And we have a duty. Out of that duty comes the revolutionary context of transformation. You talk about drones. I remember I was speaking at a meeting, and this is sometimes how it happens. I was speaking at a meeting, Martin Luther King Day celebration, and some people were talking about, you know, we got to do whatever we got to do, and so forth. And it was so, I mean, it was there, and it was, you know, it was fine. But all of a sudden, I was just, this is sometimes when you're actually engaging in practice, you think about it. And they would say, oh yeah, we got to end the war in Iraq. We got to do this because we got to, you know, redefine how we get money here because we got to end the war in Iraq. And I got a chance to speak, and I said, no, we got to end the war in Iraq, and we got to end the war on Mac. Because I'm looking at both of them, and we talk about drone. There's drone technology being used here. I mean, you know, this kind of stuff is not different. They're talking about hotspots in Afghanistan. They got a whole Justice Department thing for hotspots in Detroit. But that's why we have peace zones, as opposed to hotspots. And so, yes, it is our duty to resist. And Grace and I were just talking about how the meetings and the demonstrations are going on, and those are great. But Tom, I know you do it, but there has to be some vision in terms of where we go with this. Is it like the people in Baltimore have done, where they sue the banks? Is it the whole question of saying that the city shouldn't pursue interest rates? Is it like they're doing in San Bernardino, just letting it go bankrupt and deal with that? Or are we talking about a new form of governance that goes beyond all of that? So I think those are the things, as we do with the resistance, we talk about what the programmatic transformation is, that's all. So it's our duty to resist. I go to demonstrations. It's not that I won't do it. But I think if we're really going to be successful, as whatever success is defined, we have to see when we demand, when we protest, when we resist, where we want to go. I see members of the Occupy movement here. That's what they're struggling with now. They've been talking for the last 6 months about where do we go beyond Occupy and how do we build something further. And I think that's our challenge.
Thank you. I'm grateful to be in this forum today. I don't know if Sarah, my movement is here today, but that's in her words. I think I found my people. And talking about visionary leadership and organizing, I'm proud to be a visionary organizer. And I think that it's correct to say that protests outside of having a vision, it kind of affirms a feeling of impotency and releases pressure for needed change, especially when it's affirmed that we don't have the power it takes to make people change their minds about the directions they've already chosen. I think that the panel has indicated clearly that we have to first figure out what direction we're going in and what opportunities are available, what rich reality exists, and what alternatives are possible. And we have to redefine our values. And that we empower ourselves and we break our dependence on those who might exploit us. And then when they come to try to take away the new world that we've created, that's when it's appropriate, I believe, to resist. but the land is ripe for gardening, for riding bicycles, and occupying homes that have been confiscated and abandoned, and homeschooling our children if we feel that the systems have failed them, and policing our own neighborhoods, and creating a new beloved existence. And I think that until we have created that, there's nothing to resist. We're just spending energy needlessly, and then feeling affirmed again in our powerlessness and wanting to go home and say, forget about it, they are corrupt. And so I'm extremely grateful to be here to listen to what the panel was talking about, what so many of you were talking about. And I'd like to come back to what this young lady posed earlier. She said, if there is transformation taking place, is it occurring in pockets? And oftentimes it is. And so the question was, how do you get it to become, I think, more mainstream? And I think that even though, as the panel indicated again, that relationship building and transformation takes time, it's also very important that we act urgently, though, and aggressively. We have to do radical things to get people's attention and to bring dialogue to the living rooms of everybody that we're around. And even though the process may move along slowly, we still have to exert huge amounts of energy and be really strategic to open up people's minds to new frameworks and new possibilities. If it means, and we've been living in tents. I'm with an organization called These Little Hours for about 5 months now in a neighborhood. You talked about creating a peace park, and where we cleaned up an abandoned lot, and people volunteered their services, and drug dealers and pimps and protesters and activists and officials came around to pitch in to help clean up the lot. And some people come around and say, "You're smoking drugs." But it's a discipline process. We have to be patient. And I think that a key to visionary organizing and leadership and sustainable transformation is to resist the urge to find the person to blame.
Yeah.
We want to blame the people who cause trouble. We want to blame the government. We want to blame the corporations. But in the end, we're all people. And we created the today. And so it's going to take all of us to create a new tomorrow. And so when we are strong enough to resist that temptation, I think that we become a part of the solution.
The only thing I want to say is I don't want to blame the government, but I know they're responsible. And I know those corporate guys who are like sitting somewhere like the Romney-esque guys, they're kind of responsible too, you know, so I don't want to let them off the hook because, you know, I mean, if they walked in the room and said that they felt like being saved and they've been suddenly transformed, I don't think we'd kick them out, but I'd be very suspect.
So I see a few hands. I was trying to keep a line of mental record of the hands. I don't know how well I'm doing.
Hi, I'm a graduate student here from Miami, from Florida International University, doing a research project I'm just starting on looking at urban agriculture and social relations comparatively between Miami and Detroit. And just to say, I think there's something really different happening in Detroit than what's happening in Miami. But the question I have is how do you see the role of land speculators that seem to be coming into the city? Seems like there's a lot of buzz on the internet about how there's so much empty land in Detroit, you can buy it really cheap, come here, there's no one in the city. And this kind of idea is very rife in part of the popular media outside of Detroit. I don't know about inside Detroit. So how do you see yourselves dealing with, in fact, there was a radio show this morning, it's like Alex Crawley, is that some local radio show I was listening to this morning, that was talking about, oh yeah, we need entrepreneurs to come into the city, and it just sounds like there's this idea out there that Detroit is for sale for cheap. And I think about that with land speculation and gardens in particular, as people have, some of them worked on lots for a long time, or transformed things, 10 years they've been working on, or 8 years, or 4 or 5 years. And I've just been briefly talking to people have said that it's difficult for folks who have been working on land that they took over to help make things better, to get the city to give them rights to the land. And so my question is sort of open-ended as to how you see that happening, unfolding, and what do you see this visionary space being able to help resist that effort?
Perhaps that was the Craig Folly show that you're referring to this morning on the radio?
Yes, that was it.
So while Ron is telling Grace the question, I'll mention again the film We Are Not Ghosts, which Ron mentioned earlier, which will speak to some of that notion of more people not being here, and speaks to the visionary organizing that has taken place.
You want to answer? Well, okay, I yield to my elder. I will take a stab at it. I say that, there was once a situation in Nigeria where the British were taking over Nigeria. And one of the people who was on the ground in Nigeria said, this guy was saying, oh yeah, when we're taking over, we got land, we got this, we got bananas, we got coconuts, we got this. And the British imperialist was asked, he said, what about the people? And he said, what people? And the circumstances here that we have to say, all of us in this room, it's not a question of what they say, it's a question of what we say. We have to say that the displaced worker that we call a homeless person, that's outside of this building, down the street, right at where it's sitting, that the people who are the students around the corner at the school, that the senior citizens, well, when the school is over, the senior citizens that live in this building over here, we have to begin to say, maybe we're talking about something visionary right here. We have to say, we are the people of Detroit and we are here. I don't know how, whether that's a documentary, whether that's a YouTube video, whether that's t-shirts, whether that's whatever, we have to affirm that we are here and we are not going anywhere. And then we can fight for the transition of how land is expropriated, whether it be the Board of Zoning Appeals or any number of the other agencies. That was what Grace was talking about in terms of revolutionary framework. We begin to talk about how land is retained, how people are retained. And we cannot let the Midtown scenario become the scenario where you have the elite saying, we know how to build a nice little pocket and we get the federal money, or the Indian village model. We have to take the other models where we say, we, not based on our class, not based on our race, whatever, we determine that we are the people who will live in Detroit. And a lot of it in Detroit is saying, when Grace talked about the coming of the era of Black power is now to create a framework that says, well, can we have a white mayor? I mean, what in the hell is that? I wanted to say, can we have a woman mayor? I don't know, we have an Asian mayor. What difference? The question is, do we have the right mayor? Do we have the right government? Do we have the right situation? Those are the things that we begin to say when we say that we are here as a people. Our answers are within the questions that we raise, We do not depend on the government to say who stays and who goes. If we decide to stay, we support each other. So you should commit, as part of that constituent assembly that Grace is talking about, people in that room become a part of this, and we begin to talk about that we are here in Detroit, we will remain, we will support the people here, and we will transform this city. That is important because Detroit is not just Detroit. Detroit is an international symbol of the people who changed the world before, and we can change it again. And that's the way we have to see ourselves. We cannot think about what the people who don't know how to run, they didn't know how to run a steel company. One of the guys got paid for being an informant, Gary Brown. And I'm not putting him down, I'm just saying these are not the talented tenths, pardon the expression. You guys are, because you're here tonight. We have members of the Boggs Center here, Kim, and we have Shannon from the Coalition, and Diane Reed, and all of you people we work with. You set the basis for the new government and the new creation. That's what we have to do. So the questions I ask myself these days is, how can I see beyond the impediments that we find ourselves facing? It's not looking at the tank in front of us, but how to get around the tank, or maybe get the treads from not rolling over us. That's what we have to do.
I think I'd like to assure you that the struggle is not over. We have established a kind of beachhead that's recognized by people. But there are struggles ahead. There are a lot of people who think they would like to have the old jobs. They think that you're growing your own food and bringing the country and the city is going backwards. They think that the ideal society is industrial society and urbanization. What I think we are at the stage where we can begin to recognize the degree to which industrial society and being locked into a machine de-skilled us and dehumanized us. That what would seem to be the dream of the future for a couple hundred years is no longer a dream. We now realize that a lot of our problems with regard to wildfires, floods, disastrous weather, all come from that industrial society. Unfortunately, we are now creating an alternative, and we don't have to imperil our planet and all living things. But the struggle is not over. If anybody, like Hans Franz, came into town and said, we'll build a factory and create jobs, there'll be a lot of people who would like to have the jobs. They'd like to go back to the past. It's not always, everybody is not, human beings are not a school of fish. They don't all respond the same way. But we are struggling for something new, something different. It's been recognized. You'd be amazed at the number of universities who come to the Boggs Center and to Detroit to study the future. Because they say there's no use having urban planning classes and architectural classes and sociology classes that only study the past. We are the future. We still have to struggle for it.
And in the term of resistance, we still have to fight for it.
So, I see there are a few hands, but we also got to be mindful of the time. So, please forgive me, but it's time to close this part of the program. But we can still have smaller conversations as we move next door. And right now, Gina has something to present to Ron. Grace.
So I would like to extend my deepest thanks for the Boggs Center for speaking about visionary organizing. So everyone, thank you. And I would like to thank you all for coming and sitting and listening to the talk and asking your questions. As a token of our thanks, we would like to present the much sought after Detroit Center mug filled with candy. So there are refreshments in the next room, and thank you for coming.
As an old U of M guy, I guess, and in the spirit of what we're saying tonight in visionary organizing, I'll just steal their statement from the fight song. Since we're talking about the future, to all of you, hail to the victors.